Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the extraordinary life of Gaius Julius Caesar, the man who didn't just conquer Gaul, but basically rewrote the rules of power, politics, and dying dramatically. He shared bias saive and to Liseva, Paliasive. From his humble beginnings in the rough neighborhoods of Rome to crossing the Rubicon and reshaping an empire, Caesar's story is one of ambition so fierce, it literally changed the course of history. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into the past. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see our global community of history lovers. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's journey back to ancient Rome together. Your story begins around 100 BCE in Rome, during what historians diplomatically call a period of transition, and what you, if you could speak as a baby, might have called complete political chaos with a side of civil war. The Roman Republic is having what you might generously describe as growing pains. And by growing pains we mean powerful men are literally tearing the state apart, like dogs fighting over a particularly juicy bone. It's not exactly the ideal time to be born, unless you happen to enjoy the sound of armies marching through your neighborhood and politicians stabbing each other in the back, metaphorically, mostly. You're born into the Julian family, which sounds impressive until you realize that in Rome, having an ancient name is a bit like having a fancy coat that's been patched so many times you can barely see the original fabric. The Julians claim descent from Venus herself, which is either incredibly prestigious or the ancient equivalent of saying your great-grandfather was definitely a celebrity. Trust us. Your family has history, tradition, and just enough political connections to be dangerous, but not quite enough money to buy their way out of trouble when it inevitably comes knocking. Your neighborhood, the suburra, is not exactly the Roman equivalent of a gated community. Think more like ancient Rome's version of a bustling, slightly dangerous downtown district, where senators' sons mingle with prostitutes, gladiators grab lunch next to poets, and the smell of cooking food fights a losing battle against the aroma of unwashed humanity. It's rough, it's loud, it's chaotic, and it's absolutely perfect training for a future politician. Because if you can navigate the suburra without getting your toga stolen or your purse cut, you can probably handle the Senate. Your father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, because Romans had all the creativity of a broken record when it came to names, is a decent enough politician, but nothing spectacular. He's the kind of man who shows up to Senate meetings, votes the way he's supposed to, and goes home to complain about the state of the Republic over dinner. Respectable, reliable, and absolutely nothing like the storm that's brewing inside his infant son. Your mother, Aurelia, is a different story entirely. She's sharp, politically savvy, and possesses the kind of iron will that can bend a grown senator to her wishes with nothing more than a carefully raised eyebrow. In a world where women aren't supposed to have political power, Aurelia wields influence like a master swordsman wields a blade, subtly, effectively, and with devastating precision. She's going to shape you in ways that will echo through history, though she probably doesn't know it yet, as she watches her baby son grab at shadows and make sounds that could either be early attempts at speech or future declarations of war. From the moment you can toddle around on unsteady legs, something sets you apart from other patrician children. Maybe it's the way you watch everything with those sharp eyes, cataloging weaknesses and advantages like a tiny general surveying a battlefield. Maybe it's how you seem to instinctively understand that every conversation is a negotiation, every smile is a strategy, and every friendship is a potential alliance or threat. Or maybe it's just that you're one of those kids who seems to be born understanding that the world is a game and you're already planning how to win it. Your early education follows the traditional Roman model, which means you learn to read, write, and speak like a proper citizen, while also absorbing the kind of political awareness that comes from living in a house where dinner conversations revolve around who's betraying whom in the forum. Your tutors, probably Greek slaves, with more education than half the Senate, teach you rhetoric, philosophy, and the art of speaking in public without making a complete fool of yourself. These skills will serve you well, considering that in Roman politics, the ability to give a good speech is only slightly less important than the ability to survive an assassination attempt. But what really shapes your early years isn't the formal education or the family connections. It's the streets of the Subura themselves, while other patrician boys are safely tucked away in their family compounds, learning to be proper Roman gentlemen. You're out there mixing with the common people, the soldiers, the merchants, the gladiators. You learn their language, their concerns, their dreams, and their grievances. You discover that the average Roman citizen is just as smart as any senator, just with fewer opportunities and a lot more to lose. This education in real-world politics will prove invaluable later because you'll understand something that most of your aristocratic peers never grasp in a republic. Power ultimately comes from the people, and if you can speak to them, if you can make them believe in you, you can accomplish things that all the ancient bloodlines and fancy togas in the world can't achieve. As you grow from a precocious child into a teenager with ambitions that probably worry your parents, Rome itself is changing around you. The old certainties are crumbling like poorly maintained aqueducts. Powerful generals are starting to realize that armies are more loyal to commanders who pay them than to abstract concepts like the Republic. Politicians are discovering that rules are really more like guidelines when you have enough swords backing you up. And ambitious young men like yourself are beginning to understand that the traditional paths to power might not be sufficient for the dreams burning in your chest. Your teenage years unfold against a backdrop of increasing political violence. This isn't the genteel backstabbing of palace intrigue. This is blood in the streets, heads on spikes, and armies marching on Rome itself. It's his blood in the streets. It's terrifying, it's exhilarating, and it's absolutely educational for a young man trying to figure out how power really works. You watch as strongmen rise and fall, as alliances shift like sand in a windstorm, as the very foundations of the Roman state strain under the weight of competing ambitions. And somewhere in that chaos, as you watch the old world dying and a new one struggling to be born, you begin to understand your destiny. You're not here to preserve the Republic as it was. You're here to transform it into something entirely new. The only question is whether you'll live long enough to see it through. The path to power in Rome isn't exactly a straight line. It's more like a gladiatorial maze where every turn could lead to glory or a very unpleasant death. As a young man from a decent but not spectacular family, you can't simply buy your way to the top or rely on inherited influence to carry you through. You're going to have to be smarter, more ruthless, and significantly more charming than your competition. Fortunately, you seem to have been born with a natural talent for all three. Your first real taste of political life comes when you're barely old enough to shave properly. Most young patricians spend their early 20s learning to manage family estates or shadowing their fathers in boring administrative positions. You, however, decide to jump straight into the deep end of Roman politics by pursuing the traditional cursus honorum, the ladder of political offices that every ambitious Roman must climb. It's like a particularly deadly game of snakes and ladders, where landing on the wrong square doesn't just send you back to the start. It can end with you being exiled, bankrupted, or introduced to a very sharp knife in a dark alley. Your early political career is a masterclass in understanding your audience. You quickly grasp something that many of your peers miss in Rome. There are really two games being played simultaneously. The forden the end of A's and so to finish. The forden the end of A's and 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 the end of and the end of A's 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 and the end of A. There's the formal political game, played in the Senate, and the forum, according to centuries-old traditions. And there's the street-level game, played in taverns and markets, and wherever ordinary Romans gather to complain about their lives. Most politicians focus on one or the other. You decide to master both. In the formal political arena, you learn to speak with the eloquence expected of a proper Roman gentleman. Your rhetoric is polished, your arguments are sophisticated, and your knowledge of law and precedent is impressive enough to earn respect from even your opponents. You understand that in the Senate, perception is reality, and if you can make yourself appear learned and reasonable, and traditionally Roman, you can get away with quite a lot. But it's in the streets where you really shine. You have an almost supernatural ability to connect with ordinary Romans, the shopkeepers, the soldiers, the craftsmen, the freed slaves trying to make something of themselves. You don't talk down to them or patronize them with empty promises. Instead, you listen to their concerns, remember their names, and speak to them like they matter, because you understand something fundamental. These people are the real source of power in Rome, even if they don't always realize it themselves. Your early political successes are built on this dual approach. When you run for minor offices, you campaign in both the gilded halls of the aristocracy and the smoky taverns of the common quarters. You promise reform and stability to the masses, while reassuring the elite that you're not going to overturn the natural order of things too drastically. It's a delicate balancing act, like juggling flaming torches while riding a chariot, but somehow you make it look effortless. Of course, success in Roman politics requires more than just popular appeal. It also requires money, and lots of it. Elections aren't won with good intentions and stirring speeches alone. They're won with bribes, entertainment, and the kind of spectacular public displays that make voters remember your name fondly when they're marking their ballots. The problem is, your family doesn't have that kind of money. The solution, as you quickly discover, is to borrow it. This begins what will become a lifelong pattern for you. Spending money you don't have on political ventures that you absolutely must win. Because losing means not just political failure, but financial ruin. It's the kind of high-stakes gambling that would give a modern financial advisor a heart attack. But in Rome, it's just Tuesday. You borrow from wealthy patrons, you promise future favors to investors, and you leverage your family's reputation like a man betting his house on a single roll of the dice. The strategy works, mostly because you have an almost supernatural ability to deliver on your promises. When you tell someone you'll remember their support, you actually do. When you promise that backing you will be profitable, you find ways to make it true. And when you threaten your enemies with consequences, well, they quickly learn that you're not the type to make empty threats. Your rise through the lower offices is steady, but not spectacular. Mean at exactly what you want. You're building a reputation as a competent, reliable politician who gets things done without causing too much trouble. You're also building a network of allies, debtors, and people who owe you favors. Most importantly, you're learning how the system really works. Not the way it's supposed to work according to dusty old laws, but the way it actually functions when ambition meets opportunity in the back rooms where real decisions are made. All the while, you're watching the bigger players on the political stage, studying their moves like a general, studying the tactics of enemy commanders. You watch Pompey build his reputation through military conquest. You observe Crassus accumulate wealth and influence through careful financial maneuvering. You see how Cicero uses his oratory skills to punch above his weight in political circles. And you file away every lesson, every mistake, every moment of weakness or strength, building a mental library of political intelligence that will serve you when your time comes to play for the highest stakes. Because even in these early years, you know that minor offices and modest successes aren't going to be enough. You're not here to be a respectable senator who votes the right way and retires to a comfortable villa. You're here to reshape Rome itself, and that kind of transformation requires the kind of power that can only be won through exceptional measures. The question isn't whether you'll reach for that power, it's how far you'll have to go to seize it, and what you'll be willing to sacrifice along the way. If there's one thing that sets you apart from other ambitious Romans, it's your understanding that sometimes the most important alliances are forged not in marble halls or elegant dinner parties, but in the shadows where desperate men make deals that history will either vindicate or condemn. Enter your relationship with Crassus and Pompey. These men who couldn't be more different from each other or from you, but who share one crucial characteristic. They're all willing to break a few rules to get what they want. Crassus is Rome's richest man, which in a city where money flows like wine at a victory celebration is saying something. He's built his fortune through real estate speculation, slave trading, and the kind of financial maneuvering that would make a modern hedge fund manager weep with envy. He's also ruthlessly practical, utterly without sentiment, and possesses the kind of cold intelligence that can calculate the exact price of a man's loyalty down to the last denarius. Most people fear him. You see him as a useful ally. Pompey, on the other hand, is Rome's golden boy, the general who's never met a military campaign he couldn't win, or a crowd he couldn't charm. He's handsome, successful, and has that effortless charisma that makes soldiers willing to march through hell for him, and citizens willing to throw flowers at his feet during triumphal parades. He's also vain, politically naive, and has the strategic thinking of a particularly aggressive bull. Most people adore him. You see him as a tool to be carefully wielded. The three of you shouldn't work together. Your personalities clash like gladiators in the arena. Your goals often conflict, and none of you particularly trusts the others. But you share something more important than friendship or mutual respect. You all understand that the traditional Roman political system is broken beyond repair, and that fixing it will require the kind of coordinated action that the hidebound Senate could never authorize. The alliance you forge, me later historians will call it the First Triumvirate, though you prefer to think of it as three ambitious men agreeing not to destroy each other until after you've destroyed your common enemies, is a masterpiece of practical politics. Crassus provides the money, Pompey provides the military prestige and popular support, and you provide the political skill and strategic vision to tie it all together. It's like creating a three-headed monster, each head capable of devouring a different part of your opposition. The beauty of the arrangement is its flexibility. When you need to pass legislation, Crassus opens his treasury to ensure the right votes are bought and the right palms are greased. When you need popular support, Pompey's veterans march through the streets, reminding everyone that Rome's greatest general stands behind your initiatives. And when you need someone to actually navigate the treacherous waters of Senate politics, well, that's where your particular talents come in handy. Of course, managing this alliance requires the diplomatic skills of an ambassador and the nerves of a tightrope walker. Crassus and Pompey despise each other with the pure, clean hatred that only former allies can achieve. They constantly compete for your attention, your support, and your assurance that you're not secretly planning to side with the other one when the inevitable betrayal comes. It's like being married to two jealous spouses who both happen to command armies. You handle this by being scrupulously fair in your betrayals. When Crassus wants something that conflicts with Pompey's interests, you find a way to give them both part of what they want while ensuring that neither gets enough to become completely independent of your mediation. When Pompey pushes for military commands that would threaten Crassus's financial interests, you broker compromises that leave everyone slightly dissatisfied but still committed to the partnership. The arrangement works beautifully. At least initially. Legislation that should take months of debate gets rammed through the Senate in days. Military commands are distributed according to your collective needs, rather than traditional precedent. Opposition politicians find themselves isolated, outmaneuvered, and occasionally reminded that there are fates worse than political irrelevance. But you understand something that your partners don't. This alliance is a means, not an end. Eventually, the three of you will have to face the fact that Rome isn't big enough for three men who each believe themselves destined for greatness. When that day comes, the coalition will fracture along the fault lines you're already carefully mapping. The question isn't whether you'll betray Crassus and Pompey me, it's when, how, and whether you can do it in a way that leaves you as the last man standing. For now, though, the triumvirate serves your purposes perfectly. It gives you the resources and backing you need to pursue your ultimate goal. A military command significant enough to build the kind of reputation that can only be forged in blood and conquest. Because you've studied Roman history, and you know that the path to supreme power runs through the battlefield. Every great Roman leader, Marius, Sulla, Pompey himself, built their political careers on military glory. You're about to get your chance to join that elite company, and the opportunity comes in the form of a region that most Romans consider a backwater posting suitable for has-beens and political exiles. The province is called Gaul, and it's about to become the stage for the most important performance of your life. Gaul, to most Romans, is where civilization goes to die. It's a collection of tribes who paint themselves blue, worship trees, and have the audacity to resist Roman culture by continuing to live like their ancestors did when Rome was just a collection of mud huts on some hills next to a river. The general Roman opinion of Gauls is that they're useful for slavery, decent enough in a fight, and produce some interesting crafts. But they're certainly not the kind of people you'd want to invite to a dinner party, unless you enjoy conversations about cattle raids and mystical druids. For you, however, Gaul represents something much more valuable than a posting to the frontier. It's an opportunity. The province is officially at peace, which means there's no immediate military glory to be won, but you've studied the situation carefully enough to know that peace in Gaul is usually just a temporary pause between conflicts. The tribes are restless, the borders are fluid, And there's always some ambitious chieftain looking to make a name for himself by challenging Roman authority. More importantly, Gaul is vast, wealthy, and largely unconquered. While Romans control the southern regions that they call Provincia, the area that will eventually become province in France, the rest of Gaul stretches north to mysterious lands where the tribes grow increasingly warlike, and the potential for both profit and glory grows exponentially. It's like being handed a blank map and told to fill it in however you see fit. Your appointment as governor of Gaul is a political masterstroke that showcases everything you've learned about manipulating the Roman system. Technically, it's a routine administrative posting, the kind of job that keeps ambitious politicians busy and safely away from Rome while they're building their careers. In practice, it's a license to start your own private wars, conquer new territories, and build the kind of military reputation that can serve as a foundation for supreme power. The legal framework is beautifully flexible. As governor, you have imperium, the authority to command armies and make decisions without consulting Rome for every minor detail. This means that if a Gallic tribe happens to attack Roman territory, you can respond with whatever force you deem necessary. And if that response happens to involve conquering several neighboring tribes who weren't originally involved in the conflict, well, that's just the natural result of thorough military planning. You arrive in Gaul with a relatively small force, 4 legions, which sounds impressive until you realize you're planning to conquer a territory roughly the size of modern France, with fewer soldiers than would fit in a modern football stadium. But you understand something about warfare that many commanders miss. Sometimes the size of your army matters less than how you use it, and a smaller force that moves quickly and strikes decisively can accomplish more than a massive army that lumbers around the countryside like a drunken elephant. Your first campaigns are textbook examples of how to turn small conflicts into major conquests. The Helvetii, a tribe from what is now Switzerland, decide to migrate through Roman territory. It's not necessarily an act of aggression. They're essentially asking for permission to pass through, but you recognize an opportunity when you see one. You refuse their request, force them into a military confrontation, and then use their defeat as justification for extending Roman control deeper into Gallic territory. It's brilliant, ruthless, and completely effective. The Helvetii campaign establishes you as a military commander to be feared, gives your legions their first taste of victory, and provides you with enough plunder to start paying down the massive debts you accumulated during your political rise. More importantly, it sends a message to every other tribe in Gaul. The new Roman governor is not interested in maintaining the status quo. What follows is 8 years of some of the most spectacular military campaigning in Roman history. You don't just conquer Gaul, you systematically dismantle every coalition, alliance, and resistance movement that dares to challenge Roman authority. You fight against tribal confederations, cross rivers that Romans have never crossed before, and even launch expeditions to Britain, an island so remote and mysterious that most Romans aren't entirely convinced it actually exists. Your tactics are innovative, your logistics are impeccable, and your ability to adapt to changing circumstances is almost supernatural. When the Gauls try to use their knowledge of local terrain against you, you learn it better than they do. When they attempt to outlast you through superior numbers, you divide your forces and defeat them piecemeal. When they unite under charismatic leaders like Vercingetorix, you lay siege to their strongholds and starve them into submission. But perhaps most importantly, you write it all down. Your commentaries on the Gallic Wars become the definitive account of the campaigns, written in a style that manages to be both brutally honest about the realities of warfare and subtly self-aggrandizing about your own role in events. You describe your own actions in the third person, which gives the whole narrative an air of objective historical analysis, while ensuring that every reader understands exactly who was responsible for these remarkable victories. The numbers, by the end of your Gallic campaigns, are staggering. You've conquered territory that will remain Roman for the next 5 centuries. You've brought millions of people under Roman rule, enslaved hundreds of thousands more, and accumulated enough wealth to make even Crassus envious. Your legions are veterans now, hardened by years of constant campaigning, and utterly loyal to the commander who's led them to victory after victory. More importantly, you've transformed yourself from a talented politician into something much more dangerous, a successful general with an army that follows him personally, rather than the distant authority of the Roman state. You're no longer just another ambitious senator looking for advancement. You're a warlord with the resources and military reputation to challenge anyone in Rome, including your former partners in the triumvirate. The question now is what to do with all that power, and whether Rome is ready for the return of Julius Caesar. Back in Rome, while you're busy turning Gaul into a Roman province and yourself into a military legend, the political situation is deteriorating faster than milk in the Mediterranean sun. The triumvirate, that carefully balanced arrangement of mutual self-interest that once seemed so stable, is cracking under the weight of success, jealousy, and the simple fact that 3 ambitious men can only share power for so long before they start eyeing each other's throats. Crassus, never content to be merely the richest man in Rome when he could also be its greatest military hero, has embarked on his own campaign in the east. He's convinced that conquering Parthia, the powerful empire that controls much of modern-day Iran and Iraq, will finally give him the military glory that has always eluded him. It's the kind of decision that makes perfect sense if you're a wealthy man tired of being overshadowed by your more charismatic partners, and absolutely no sense if you understand anything about Parthian military tactics or the geography of ancient Mesopotamia. The campaign goes about as well as you might expect. Crassus, who built his fortune through careful calculation and patient maneuvering, proves to be utterly hopeless at desert warfare against an enemy that treats cavalry charges like a religious sacrament. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthians demonstrate why heavy infantry tactics work brilliantly in Europe and catastrophically in the desert. Crassus loses his army, his life, and according to legend, his head gets turned into a prop for a theatrical performance of Euripides the Bacchae. It's the kind of death that manages to be both politically significant and deeply undignified. With Crassus gone, the triumvirate becomes a duumvirate, which in Roman politics is like trying to balance on a 2-legged stool. Pompey, suddenly free from the need to compete with Crassus for primacy, begins to position himself as Rome's indispensable man. He's still handsome, still popular, and still commands the loyalty of veterans throughout the empire. What he lacks in political subtlety, he makes up for in sheer audacity, and the kind of self-confidence that comes from never having suffered a major military defeat. Pompey's strategy is elegant in its simplicity. Position himself as the defender of republican tradition against the growing threat of military strongmen, who put personal ambition above constitutional law. The irony, of course, is that Pompey himself is exactly the kind of military strongman he's supposedly protecting Rome against. But irony has never been a major factor in Roman political rhetoric. The beauty of Pompey's position is that he gets to present himself as the responsible adult in a room full of dangerous children. He's not trying to overturn the Republic. He's trying to save it from people like, well, you. He's not accumulating power for personal gain. He's accepting the burden of leadership because Rome needs a steady hand in turbulent times. It's a narrative that plays beautifully in the Senate, where many members are genuinely terrified of what might happen if military commanders start thinking they're more important than civilian authority. Meanwhile, your own position is becoming increasingly precarious. Your success in Gaul has made you fabulously wealthy, politically prominent, and militarily formidable. But it's also made you a target. Every senator who's ever felt threatened by your rise, every politician who's ever been outmaneuvered by your alliances, every traditionalist who believes that the Republic is being destroyed by ambitious upstarts, they're all starting to coalesce around the idea that Julius Caesar has become too powerful for Rome's own good. The legal situation is particularly complex. Your governorship of Gaul gives you immunity from prosecution, but that immunity expires the moment you return to Rome as a private citizen. Your enemies have been busy during your absence, preparing a list of charges that ranges from exceeding your authority as governor to outright treason. Some of these charges might even be true, though in Roman politics, the relationship between legal guilt and actual wrongdoing is often more theoretical than practical. Your options, as you see them from your headquarters in Gaul, are limited and all potentially catastrophic. You can return to Rome as a private citizen, face trial, and trust that your wealth and political connections will be sufficient to secure acquittal. You can attempt to transition directly from your governorship to a consulship, maintaining your immunity through continuous office holding. Or you can do something that no Roman general has done for decades: march on Rome itself with your legions at your back. The first option is essentially suicide. Your enemies have had years to prepare their case, and Roman courts have a tendency to convict popular generals when the political winds are blowing in the right direction. The second option requires a level of political maneuvering that might be impossible, given the current composition of the Senate and the growing opposition to your return. Which leaves the third option, the one that will either crown you as Rome's master or see you dead in a ditch with your head on a spike. It's the kind of decision that separates great leaders from merely competent ones. The willingness to bet everything on a single irrevocable choice. The river you'll have to cross to make that choice is called the Rubicon, and it's about to become the most famous waterway in European history. The Rubicon is, objectively speaking, a completely unremarkable river. It's shallow, narrow, and in most places you could probably wade across it without getting your knees wet. Under normal circumstances, it's the kind of geographical feature that cartographers note out of professional obligation and travelers ignore entirely. But the Rubicon has one characteristic that makes it absolutely crucial to your current situation. It marks the boundary between Gaul and Italy, and crossing it with an army is the legal equivalent of declaring war on Rome itself. Roman law is quite specific on this point. Provincial governors are allowed to command armies within their assigned territories, but bringing those armies into Italy without explicit permission from the Senate is considered an act of treason, punishable by death, exile, and the kind of posthumous character assassination that makes historical infamy look attractive by comparison. The law exists for obvious reasons. It prevents ambitious generals from using their legions to intimidate the civilian government. But it also means that once you cross that river, there's no turning back. You've spent weeks camped near the Rubicon, ostensibly preparing for winter quarters, but actually wrestling with the most important decision of your life. Your legions are ready. They've followed you through 8 years of Gallic campaigns, and they're prepared to follow you anywhere, including into a civil war against their own country. Your officers understand the stakes and have made their choice to stand with you regardless of the consequences. Your enemies in Rome have made it clear that they intend to destroy you the moment you're vulnerable. The rational choice, the safe choice, would be to disband your army and return to Rome to face whatever charges await you. You're wealthy enough to afford the best legal representation, connected enough to call in favors from across the political spectrum, and charismatic enough to sway a jury if the case actually comes to trial. It's possible, even probable, that you could survive the legal challenges and emerge with your reputation and prospects intact. But you've never been particularly interested in rational choices, and you understand something about power that your enemies don't. Once you've risen to a certain level, there's no such thing as a graceful retreat. Your success in Gaul hasn't just made you rich and famous, it's made you a threat to everyone who holds power in Rome. Even if you somehow survived the immediate legal challenges, you'd spend the rest of your political career looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next attempt to destroy you. More importantly, you've seen what the Republic has become during your absence. The Senate is paralyzed by partisan bickering. The streets of Rome are controlled by gangs loyal to various political factions, and the whole system seems designed to prevent decisive action rather than enable effective governance. You've spent 8 years demonstrating that Roman arms and Roman law can bring peace and prosperity to barbarian lands. Why shouldn't they be able to do the same for Rome itself? The decision, when you finally make it, is almost anticlimactic. You're sitting by the riverbank with a few close advisors, discussing the practical details of what crossing the Rubicon would mean for supply lines and winter quarters. Someone mentions that there's still time to turn back, that war isn't inevitable, that perhaps another solution could be found through negotiation and compromise. You stand up, look across the shallow water toward Italy, and speak the words that will echo through history. Alia iacta est, the die is cast. Then you step into the water, and with that single step, you transform yourself from a Roman governor into something new and dangerous, a rebel with the power to reshape the world. Your legions follow without hesitation, splashing across the Rubicon like they're crossing any other stream on any other day. But everyone understands that this isn't just a river crossing, it's the end of the Roman Republic as it has existed for centuries and the beginning of something entirely new. Behind you lies your old life as a successful but ultimately constrained Roman politician. Ahead lies either supreme power or spectacular death, with very little middle ground between the two. The civil war that follows your crossing of the Rubicon is unlike any conflict Rome has ever seen. Previous civil wars were essentially struggles between competing factions within the Roman elite, fought by armies that shared common traditions, tactics, and understanding of what they were fighting for. This war is different because it's not just about who will control the Republic, it's about whether the Republic will continue to exist at all. Pompey, who has positioned himself as the defender of constitutional government, discovers that defending the constitution against a superior enemy is considerably more difficult than he anticipated. His strategy, such as it is, relies on the assumption that you'll behave like a traditional Roman general, advancing slowly, respecting established protocols, giving your enemies time to organize their defenses and rally their supporters. Instead, you move like lightning. Your legions, hardened by years of campaigning in Gaul and absolutely devoted to their commander, march south faster than anyone thought possible. You don't pause to lay siege to fortified cities or consolidate your control over conquered territory. You simply advance, accepting the surrender of any town or army unit wise enough to submit and bypassing anything that shows signs of resistance. The psychological effect is devastating. Romans wake up one morning to discover that the rebel army they thought was still safely north of the Alps is actually approaching the outskirts of their city. Pompey's supporters, who had months to prepare for your eventual arrival, suddenly find themselves scrambling to implement half-formed plans with insufficient resources and rapidly diminishing time. The speed of your advance also forces everyone in Rome to make a choice immediately and irrevocably. There's no time for fence-sitting, no opportunity for the kind of careful political maneuvering that usually characterizes Roman decision-making. You're either with Caesar or against him, and the consequences of choosing incorrectly are likely to be severe regardless of who ultimately wins. Many choose you, some out of genuine conviction, but most out of practical calculation. You've demonstrated over 8 years in Gaul that you know how to win wars, treat your soldiers well, and reward loyalty generously. Pompey may represent constitutional legitimacy, but constitutions don't pay soldiers' salaries or guarantee security for people who find themselves on the losing side of a civil war. Pompey's response to your rapid advance is strategically sound but politically disastrous. He evacuates Rome. The logic is impeccable. Modern self is indefensible against an army that can march faster than news of its approach. And Pompey's strength lies in the eastern provinces where his clients and veterans are concentrated. By withdrawing to Greece and the east, he can build up his forces, secure his supply lines, and force you to fight on terrain of his choosing. The problem is that abandoning Rome looks like cowardice, regardless of the strategic justification. Romans have a deep, almost mystical attachment to their city, and the idea of letting an enemy occupy it without a fight strikes many as fundamentally un-Roman. When Pompey's ships disappear over the horizon, carrying the legitimate government of Rome into exile, you're left standing in the forum as the unchallenged master of the greatest city in the world. Your entry into Rome is a masterpiece of political theatre. You don't march through the streets like a conquering barbarian or demand immediate submission from the population. Instead, you present yourself as a Roman citizen returning home after years of faithful service to the Republic, forced into this unfortunate position by the unreasonable hostility of your political enemies. The message is clear. You're not here to destroy Rome, you're here to save it from the corrupt politicians and incompetent leaders who have brought the Republic to the brink of collapse. You pay your soldiers from your own treasury. You respect private property, and you treat captured enemies with the kind of clemency that demonstrates both strength and magnanimity. It's a carefully calculated performance designed to show Romans that life under Caesar might actually be preferable to the chaos and uncertainty they've endured under the traditional system. But even as you consolidate your control over Italy with shocking speed and efficiency, you know that the real war is just beginning. Pompey may have fled, but he's far from defeated. In the eastern provinces, he commands the loyalty of Rome's most experienced legions, controls the wealth of Asia and Egypt, and has the support of kings and client rulers throughout the Mediterranean. On paper, his resources dwarf yours. In practice, you've just demonstrated that paper calculations often prove inadequate when confronted with audacity, speed, and superior generalship. The campaign that follows takes you from Spain to Greece to Egypt, a whirlwind tour of the Mediterranean world that showcases both your military genius and your growing understanding that you're no longer fighting just for control of Rome. You're fighting for the right to reshape the entire Roman world according to your vision of what an empire should be. Your pursuit of Pompey leads you first to Spain, where you demonstrate that the rapid march tactics that served you so well in Italy work equally effectively on other fronts. Pompey's generals in Spain discover that defending prepared positions against an enemy who refuses to attack them directly can be more challenging than simply winning a straightforward battle. You outmaneuver them, cut their supply lines and force them to surrender without fighting the kind of decisive engagement that might give them a chance to inflict serious casualties on your forces. The Spanish campaign also gives you an opportunity to refine your approach to governance. You don't simply conquer territory, you reorganize it. Local elites who submit are confirmed in their positions but bound to you through personal loyalty rather than abstract allegiance to distant republican institutions. Veterans are settled in new colonies that serve both as rewards for faithful service and as strategic strongpoints for future campaigns. Administrative systems are streamlined to reduce corruption and increase efficiency. It's during this period that you begin to articulate a vision of empire that goes far beyond simply expanding Roman control over foreign peoples. You're creating a system where Roman citizenship can be extended to worthy provincials, where local traditions are respected within the framework of Roman law, and where the vast resources of the Mediterranean world can be mobilized more effectively than ever before. It's not just conquest, it's transformation on a scale that no previous Roman leader has even attempted. The pursuit of Pompey eventually leads you to Greece, where the decisive phase of the civil war will be fought. Pompey has used his time in exile well, building up an army that significantly outnumbers your forces and securing his supply lines through control of the eastern Mediterranean. When the two armies finally meet at Pharsalus, it appears that Pompey holds every advantage except one: he's facing Julius Caesar. The Battle of Pharsalus is a masterclass in tactical innovation and strategic psychology. Pompey's plan is straightforward and should be effective. Use his superior numbers to overwhelm your flanks while his cavalry sweeps around to attack your rear. It's the kind of plan that works against most enemies, but you've spent years developing countermeasures for exactly this type of conventional attack. You create a fourth line of troops hidden behind your main formation, specifically positioned to counter Pompey's cavalry charge. When his horsemen sweep around your flank as expected, they run directly into a trap that not only stops their attack but sends them fleeing in panic. The psychological effect on Pompey's infantry is devastating. Nisa. They watch their supposedly invincible cavalry break and run, and suddenly their numerical superiority feels less decisive. The battle becomes a rout. Pompey's veterans, who had expected to face a desperate rebel with an outnumbered army, instead find themselves being systematically dismantled by an enemy who seems to anticipate their every move. By the end of the day, Pompey's army has ceased to exist as an effective fighting force, and the man himself is fleeing toward Egypt with a handful of loyal followers. Your victory at Pharsalus should end the civil war, but you understand that truly decisive victories require more than just winning battles. As long as Pompey lives, he remains a potential rallying point for your enemies. As long as the eastern provinces remain under hostile control, your position is vulnerable to future challenges. The war won't be over until you've eliminated not just Pompey's army, but Pompey himself, and the entire network of alliances and client relationships that supported him. The pursuit leads you to Egypt, where you discover that politics can be even more treacherous than warfare. The Egyptians, reasoning that the quickest way to gain favor with Rome's new master is to eliminate his predecessor, present you with Pompey's head as a welcoming gift. It's the kind of gesture that shows complete misunderstanding of how Romans think about honor, loyalty, and the proper treatment of worthy enemies. Your reaction to Pompey's assassination is one of genuine grief and anger. Whatever your political differences, Pompey was a fellow Roman, a great general, and a man who deserved better than to be murdered by foreign kings seeking political advantage. You order the execution of the officials responsible and arrange for Pompey's remains to receive the honors due to a Roman magistrate. It's both a sincere expression of respect and a calculated demonstration that Caesar's enemies can expect to be defeated honorably, not butchered like animals. Egypt itself presents both opportunities and complications. The kingdom is fabulously wealthy, strategically crucial, and politically unstable. The ruling Ptolemies are engaged in their traditional pastime of murdering each other for the throne, and the current civil war between Cleopatra VII and her brother Ptolemy XIII has left the country vulnerable to outside intervention. Your decision to support Cleopatra is based partly on practical politics. She was in power when you arrived, and therefore represents legitimate authority, and partly on personal attraction. Cleopatra is intelligent, ambitious, and possesses the kind of political sophistication that you find both useful and appealing. She's also one of the few people you've met who seems to truly understand your vision of what an empire could become if it were properly organized and led. The Egyptian campaign demonstrates your versatility as both a general and a politician. When Ptolemy XIII's forces attempt to trap you in Alexandria, you turn the siege into an opportunity to reorganize the city's defenses and establish new administrative systems. When Egyptian armies try to overwhelm you through superior numbers, you use the confined urban terrain to negate their advantages and turn their own tactics against them. More importantly, your time in Egypt gives you a chance to study a different model of governance. The Ptolemaic system, for all its flaws and dynastic instabilities, has successfully maintained control over a vast, diverse population for 3 centuries. The pharaonic bureaucracy is efficient, the tax system is productive, and the integration of Greek and Egyptian traditions has created a unique synthesis that combines the best features of both cultures. You file away these lessons for future use, already beginning to envision how similar principles might be applied to the governance of a Roman Empire that extends from Britain to Mesopotamia. The traditional Roman approach to provincial administration, essentially military occupation with minimal interference in local affairs, works adequately for controlling conquered territories, but it's inadequate for the kind of integrated, efficiently organized empire you're beginning to imagine. Your relationship with Cleopatra also provides insights into the possibilities and challenges of ruling a multicultural empire. She's not just the Queen of Egypt, she's a living symbol of how different traditions can be combined without losing their essential character. Her court blends Greek intellectual sophistication with Egyptian religious authority and Roman political pragmatism. It's a model that suggests how your own rule might eventually transcend purely Roman categories. But even as you're reorganizing Egypt and exploring new models of imperial governance, events elsewhere remind you that the civil war is far from over. Pompey's supporters have regrouped in Africa, where they're building another army under the leadership of Cato the Younger, a man whose commitment to republican principles is matched only by his hatred of everything you represent. The African campaign forces you to confront the reality that some of your enemies will never be reconciled to your rule. Cato and his followers aren't fighting for personal advancement or political advantage. They're fighting for an idea of what Rome should be, and that idea is fundamentally incompatible with your vision of imperial transformation. This isn't a conflict that can be resolved through clemency or political compromise. It's a struggle between irreconcilable worldviews, and it can only end when one side is completely eliminated. Your victory at Thapsus is even more decisive than Pharsalus, but its aftermath is more troubling. Many of your enemies choose death over surrender, preferring to maintain their principles rather than accept your clemency. Cato's suicide, in particular, demonstrates that there are limits to your ability to heal the wounds of civil war through magnanimity alone. Some divisions run too deep to be bridged, some hatreds too pure to be overcome. The final phase of the civil war takes you back to Spain, where Pompey's sons have raised yet another army in a desperate attempt to continue their father's cause. It's a campaign marked by unusual savagery on both sides, as if the long years of conflict have finally worn away the restraints that normally govern Roman warfare. By the time you achieve final victory at Munda, you've spent the better part of 5 years fighting fellow Romans, and the experience has changed you in ways that are both obvious and subtle. You return to Rome not just as the winner of a civil war, but as the undisputed master of the Roman world. Every potential rival has been eliminated, every opposing army has been destroyed, and every alternative center of power has been dismantled. For the first time in Roman history, a single man controls the entire Mediterranean basin, and that man is you. The question now is what to do with all that power, and whether the Roman system can be transformed rather than simply replaced. Rome welcomes you back with the kind of celebration usually reserved for gods rather than mortals. 4 separate triumphs are organized to honor your victories in Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa, though notably not for your civil war victories, since celebrating the defeat of fellow Romans would be inappropriate even for someone with your political flexibility. The celebrations stretch for weeks, featuring parades of captured treasure, exotic animals, and captive enemies that demonstrate to the Roman people exactly how much their new master has accomplished on their behalf. But behind the pageantry and public rejoicing, you're grappling with a problem that no Roman leader has ever faced before: how to govern an empire that has outgrown the institutions designed to manage a city-state. The traditional republican system, with its elaborate checks and balances, and its fundamental assumption that no single person should hold power for very long, is simply inadequate for the realities of ruling a territory that stretches from Britain to Egypt. Your solution is characteristically audacious. You don't abolish the republic so much as hollow it out from within, maintaining the traditional forms while gradually concentrating real authority in your own hands. The Senate continues to meet, magistrates are still elected, and laws are still passed according to ancient procedures. But everyone understands that these are essentially theatrical performances staged for the benefit of traditionalists who need to believe that Roman institutions are being preserved. In practice, you rule through a combination of personal charisma, carefully distributed patronage, and the implicit threat of force represented by your veteran legions. It's a delicate balancing act that requires you to appear simultaneously as a traditional Roman magistrate, respectful of ancient customs, and as a revolutionary leader capable of transforming the world according to your vision. Your reforms are sweeping but carefully implemented to avoid triggering the kind of conservative backlash that might unite your remaining enemies. You reorganize the calendar, reform the tax system, initiate massive public works projects, and begin extending Roman citizenship to deserving provincials. Each change is presented not as a radical departure from tradition, but as a return to the true principles of Roman governance that have been corrupted by incompetent politicians and selfish special interests. The public responds enthusiastically to your leadership. For ordinary Romans, your rule means stability, prosperity, and the kind of effective government they haven't experienced in decades. The streets are safer, food is more abundant, and there's a sense that Rome is finally being governed by someone who understands how to translate military success into civilian prosperity. But among the traditional elite, resentment builds like pressure in a sealed vessel. The streets are safer, food is more abundant, and there's a sense that Rome is finally being governed. Many senators who publicly support your reforms privately resent being reduced to ceremonial figureheads in their own government. They understand that you've essentially turned them into well-paid actors in a political theater, where all the real decisions are made backstage by you and your advisors. The tension between your vision of efficient imperial governance and the traditional Roman commitment to shared power among the elite creates an increasingly unstable situation. You need the cooperation of the senatorial class to legitimize your rule and administer your reforms. But that same class contains many people who view your very existence as an affront to everything they believe about proper Roman government. Your awareness of this tension leads you to begin planning what might be your most ambitious project yet. A campaign against Parthia that would take you away from Rome for several years while establishing Roman dominance over the eastern frontier. It's a brilliant solution to multiple problems simultaneously. It would remove you from the increasingly poisonous atmosphere of Roman politics, provide your restless veterans with new opportunities for glory and plunder, and potentially add the wealth of Mesopotamia to your already vast empire. The Parthian campaign also appeals to your sense of historical destiny. Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world before dying at 33. You're already in your 50s and have achieved comparable military success. But conquering Parthia would establish you as the greatest conqueror in human history. It's the kind of achievement that would cement your legacy regardless of whatever political problems might await your eventual return to Rome. But your enemies understand the implications of the Parthian campaign as well as you do. If you succeed in the East, you'll return to Rome with even greater wealth, even more loyal troops, and even less reason to respect the traditional limitations on individual power. If you fail, well, that would solve their problem permanently. Either way, they have only a limited window of time to act before you leave Rome and put yourself beyond their reach. The conspiracy that forms against you is both inevitable and tragic. Inevitable, because the fundamental contradiction between your imperial vision and republican traditions cannot be resolved through compromise or negotiation. Tragic, because many of the conspirators are decent men who genuinely believe they're saving Rome from tyranny, even as they prepare to destroy the one leader capable of transforming the Republic into something greater than it has ever been. The irony is that your own clemency and respect for Roman traditions have made the conspiracy possible. A more conventional tyrant would have executed his enemies after winning the civil war, but your policy of forgiveness has allowed potential threats to remain in positions where they can act against you. Your insistence on maintaining republican forms has preserved the very institutions that your enemies can use to organize resistance to your rule. As the conspiracy takes shape during the early months of 44 BCE, you're not entirely unaware that something is brewing. There are rumors, warnings from loyal friends, and a general atmosphere of tension that suggests trouble ahead. But your response is characteristically confident. You dismiss your bodyguard, continue to move freely through Rome, and behave as if the idea that fellow Romans might assassinate their greatest living citizen is simply too absurd to take seriously. Perhaps you believe that your achievements speak for themselves, that no reasonable person could prefer the chaos and incompetence of the late Republic to the stability and prosperity of your rule. Perhaps you've convinced yourself that the conspiracy represents only a small faction of embittered traditionalists without significant popular support. Or perhaps you simply refuse to live as a prisoner of your own power, guarded and isolated from the people you're trying to serve. The Ides of March arrive like any other day in what has been a remarkably successful year for your administration. Your reforms are proceeding smoothly, your Parthian preparations are nearly complete, and there's every reason to believe that you're on the verge of achieving everything you've worked toward since those early days in the Subura when you first began to dream of reshaping the world. The Senate meeting that morning is routine, dealing with the kind of administrative details that occupy most of your time now that the great military campaigns are over. You arrive without ceremony, take your place at the front of the chamber, and begin working through the agenda with the efficiency that has characterized your approach to governance throughout your career. What happens next unfolds with the terrible inevitability of a Greek tragedy. The conspirators surround you under the pretense of presenting a petition, their togos concealing the daggers that will shortly end both your life and any hope that the Roman Republic can be transformed rather than destroyed. When the first blow falls, you initially think it might be some kind of accident or perhaps a deranged individual acting alone. But as more blades find their mark and you realize that this is a coordinated attack by multiple senators, your reaction reveals something essential about your character. You don't beg for mercy or attempt to flee. Instead, you pull your toga over your head in a gesture that maintains your dignity even as your life ebbs away. Even in death, you remain conscious of your appearance and the example you're setting for history. The conspirators expect their action to be greeted with relief and celebration by a Roman people grateful to be liberated from tyranny. Instead, they discover that most Romans view the assassination not as liberation but as a catastrophic crime that has robbed them of their greatest leader at the moment of his greatest success. The streets fill not with celebrating crowds but with angry mobs demanding vengeance against the murderers. More importantly, the conspirators have no plan for what comes after your death. They've been so focused on the necessity of stopping you that they've given no serious thought to who or what should replace you. Within hours of the assassination, it becomes clear that killing Caesar has not restored the Republic. It has simply created a power vacuum that will inevitably be filled by other ambitious men with their own imperial visions. Your death triggers another civil war, this one even more destructive than the conflict that brought you to power. Your assassins are hunted down and eliminated, but not before the Roman world is torn apart by competing factions, each claiming to represent your true legacy. The Republic they died to preserve is destroyed more thoroughly by their actions than it ever would have been by your reforms. In the end, your vision of imperial transformation is realized not by you but by your adopted heir, Octavian, who proves to have inherited both your political genius and your understanding that Rome's future lies in empire rather than republic. But Octavian, who will become Augustus, learns from your fate. He achieves supreme power not through dramatic gestures and revolutionary proclamations, but through careful manipulation and patient accumulation of authority. He becomes everything you might have been if you had lived long enough to complete your transformation of the Roman state. Your legacy, however, extends far beyond the immediate political consequences of your life and death. You've demonstrated that it's possible for a single individual to reshape the world through a combination of military genius, political skill, and sheer force of personality. You've shown that traditional institutions can be transformed rather than simply preserved, and that effective leadership sometimes requires the courage to break rules that have outlived their usefulness. More than that, you've created a template for imperial leadership that will influence rulers for the next 2 millennia. The title Caesar becomes synonymous with supreme authority, adopted by everyone from Roman emperors to German Kaisers to Russian Tsars. Your combination of military conquest, administrative reform, and personal charisma establishes the model for how exceptional individuals can transcend the limitations of their birth and circumstances to achieve historical immortality. But perhaps your most important legacy is the proof that human potential is essentially unlimited when it's guided by intelligence, ambition, and the courage to attempt the impossible. You began life as the son of a minor aristocratic family in a dangerous neighborhood of Rome. You ended it as the master of the known world, having conquered territories that remained Roman for centuries and established principles of governance that influenced the development of European civilization. Your story reminds us that history is not the inevitable product of impersonal forces, but the result of choices made by individuals willing to risk everything in pursuit of their vision of what the world could become. You chose to cross the Rubicon when you could have remained safely in Gaul. You chose to pursue Pompey when you could have consolidated your control over Italy. You chose to transform the Republic when you could have simply ruled it unchanged. Each choice carried enormous risks, and several nearly resulted in your destruction. But you understood something that more cautious leaders often miss: the greatest risk is often refusing to take any risks at all. By playing it safe, by accepting the limitations imposed by tradition and precedent, you might have lived longer, but would never have achieved the kind of transformative impact that makes a life truly significant. Your death on the Ides of March represents both an ending and a beginning, the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, the end of your personal ambitions and the beginning of your historical legend, the end of one chapter in human civilization and the beginning of another that would be shaped by your example for centuries to come. Long after your body was cremated in the Forum and your ashes scattered to the winds, your name refuses to die. It echoes through the marble halls of future emperors, whispers across the battlefields where generals dream of matching your tactical brilliance, and lives on in the chronicles of historians trying to understand how one man could have changed the world so completely. The transformation you began in life continues long after your death. Augustus, your adopted heir, completes the work you started, turning your vision of imperial transformation into a political system that will endure for 5 centuries in the West and 15 centuries in the East. The Roman Empire you helped to create becomes the foundation for European civilization, spreading Roman law, Roman engineering, Roman culture, and Roman ideas of governance across a territory that stretches from Scotland to Syria. But your influence extends far beyond the purely political realm. Your literary works, particularly your commentaries on the Gallic Wars, become models of clear, precise prose that influence writers for generations. Your innovations in military tactics are studied in war colleges for 2 millennia. Your approach to governance, the combination of personal charisma, efficient administration, and carefully managed propaganda, becomes the template for successful leadership in countless different contexts. Perhaps most importantly, your life story becomes a touchstone for anyone trying to understand the relationship between individual ambition and historical change. Poets write epics about your conquests, playwrights craft tragedies about your assassination, and philosophers debate whether your career represents the triumph of human potential or the dangers of unchecked power. Shakespeare's version of your story captures something essential about your character and your fate. His Caesar is neither pure hero nor simple villain, but a complex figure whose greatness and flaws are inextricably intertwined. The play suggests that your assassination was both a terrible crime and an inevitable consequence of your own refusal to accept limitations on your power. It's a nuanced interpretation that recognizes both your achievements and the tragic elements in your story. Modern historians continue to wrestle with your legacy, trying to balance appreciation for your genuine accomplishments against awareness of the costs those accomplishments imposed on others. Your conquest of Gaul brought Roman civilization to Western Europe, but it also resulted in the death or enslavement of millions of people. Your transformation of the Republic made possible centuries of relatively stable imperial government, but it also ended the last great experiment in republican governance that the ancient world produced. These debates miss something crucial about your historical significance. You didn't live your life to provide convenient moral lessons for future generations. You lived it to achieve your own vision of what was possible for both yourself and the civilization you served. The moral complexity of your legacy reflects the moral complexity of human ambition itself. The fact that great achievements often require great sacrifices, and that the same qualities that enable transformative leadership can also lead to destructive overreach. What remains indisputable is the sheer scale of your impact on human history. Without Julius Caesar, there might have been no Roman Empire, no spread of classical civilization throughout Europe, no foundation for the development of Western law and governance. The entire trajectory of European and world history would have been fundamentally different if a particular boy from the Suburra had chosen to live a quiet, conventional life, rather than reaching for the highest pinnacles of power and achievement. Your story also serves as a reminder that historical change often comes not through gradual evolution, but through the dramatic actions of individuals willing to break with precedent and tradition. The Roman Republic might have continued for decades or even centuries if you had never crossed the Rubicon, but it would have remained an essentially conservative system designed to preserve existing arrangements rather than adapt to changing circumstances. By choosing revolution over reform, by insisting on transformation rather than preservation, you forced Rome to confront the fundamental contradictions in its political system and to develop new institutions adequate to its imperial responsibilities. It was a painful process that cost many lives and destroyed many traditions, but it also made possible achievements that would have been impossible under the old republican system. In our own time, when we face similar challenges in adapting our institutions to rapidly changing circumstances, your example remains relevant. Not as a model to be copied literally, not bin and see the specific solutions you developed for Roman problems wouldn't work in modern contexts, but as a demonstration that bold leadership can sometimes achieve what gradual reform cannot. Your willingness to risk everything on a single decisive action, or your ability to inspire absolute loyalty in your followers, your skill at communicating complex political ideas in terms that ordinary people could understand and support. These remain essential qualities for anyone trying to lead transformative change in any era. But perhaps the most important lesson of your life is simply that it's possible for human beings to transcend the circumstances of their birth and to reshape the world according to their vision of what it could become. You were born into a particular family, in a particular city, at a particular moment in history, but you refuse to accept those circumstances as permanent limitations on what you could accomplish. Through intelligence, ambition, courage, and sheer force of will, You transformed yourself from a minor Roman aristocrat into the master of the known world. You proved that individual human potential is essentially unlimited when it's guided by clear purpose and supported by the willingness to pay whatever price success demands. That may be your most enduring legacy, the proof that greatness is not reserved for people born into special circumstances or blessed with exceptional advantages. It's available to anyone willing to see beyond the limitations of their current situation and to work relentlessly toward the achievement of their highest aspirations. Your name has become synonymous with supreme power, transformative leadership, and the tragic tension between individual ambition and collective good. Caesars have ruled from the 7 hills of Rome to the steppes of Russia, each claiming to embody something of your vision and authority. But none have matched the completeness of your transformation from private citizen to historical immortality. As we remember your story tonight, we're reminded that history is not the inevitable product of vast impersonal forces, but the result of choices made by individuals who refuse to accept the world as they find it. You chose to cross the Rubicon, to pursue your enemies to the ends of the earth, to transform a republic into an empire, and to risk everything on your vision of what Roman civilization could become. Those choices cost you your life, but they also ensured that your name would be remembered as long as human beings study their own history. In the end, perhaps that's the kind of immortality that truly matters. Not the preservation of the physical body, but the permanent inscription of one's impact on the ongoing story of human civilization. Your death creates ripples that spread across the ancient world like stones thrown into still water. In Egypt, Cleopatra receives the news and understands immediately that her own position has become precarious. The queen who shared your vision of a transformed Mediterranean world now faces the prospect of dealing with lesser men who lack both your strategic genius and your appreciation for the subtleties of Eastern governance. She will eventually choose death over submission to Octavian, but for now she mourns not just a lover, but a partner in the grand project of reshaping civilization itself. In Gaul, your former soldiers gather around campfires and share stories of the campaigns that made them legendary. They speak of the morning you crossed the Rubicon, of the speed with which you moved through Italy, of the brilliance you displayed at Pharsalus. But mostly they remember smaller moments. How you knew their names, how you shared their dangers, how you made them feel like they were part of something greater than themselves. Many of them will eventually fight for Octavian, but they'll always think of themselves as Caesar's men first. In the eastern provinces, client kings and provincial governors scramble to understand what your assassination means for their own positions. You had been in the process of reorganizing the entire system of provincial administration, replacing the old arrangements based on personal relationships and traditional privileges with a more systematic approach based on efficiency and merit. Your death leaves these reforms half completed, creating a period of uncertainty that ambitious local leaders will exploit for their own advantage. But perhaps the most significant immediate consequence of your assassination is what it reveals about the Roman people themselves. The conspirators had convinced themselves that they were acting on behalf of ordinary Romans who were suffering under your tyranny. Instead, they discover that most Romans view your death as a personal tragedy and a political disaster. The crowds that fill the forum after your assassination aren't celebrating their liberation, they're demanding vengeance against the men who killed their greatest leader. This popular reaction demonstrates something fundamental about your legacy that your enemies never understood. You weren't just a successful general or a skilled politician, you had become a symbol of Roman greatness itself. Your conquests in Gaul had expanded Roman power to its greatest extent in history. Your reforms had made the city more prosperous and better governed than it had been in living memory. Your clemency toward defeated enemies had shown that Roman power could be exercised with wisdom and restraint. Most importantly, you had made ordinary Romans feel proud of their citizenship in a way that the factional conflicts and constitutional crises of the late Republic never could. Under your leadership, Rome felt like the greatest city in the world rather than just another political entity struggling with internal divisions and external threats. Your death robs them not just of effective leadership but of their sense that Rome is destined for continued greatness. The funeral arrangements become a political battleground as various factions attempt to control how your death will be remembered. Mark Antony, your loyal lieutenant and fellow consul, delivers a masterful funeral oration that inflames popular sentiment against the conspirators while carefully avoiding language that might be construed as treasonous. He displays your blood-stained toga to the crowd, points to each rent made by the assassin's daggers, and transforms your death from a political necessity into a sacred martyrdom. The crowd's response exceeds even Antony's expectations. They don't just mourn your death, they practically deify you on the spot. Impromptu shrines spring up throughout the city as ordinary Romans leave offerings of flowers, wine, and personal mementos at places associated with your life and career. Someone starts a fire in the forum, using furniture dragged from nearby houses, and soon your makeshift funeral pyre is burning so fiercely that it threatens to spread to surrounding buildings. More ominously for the conspirators, the crowd begins hunting for anyone associated with your assassination. Cinna the poet, who has the misfortune to share a name with one of the conspirators, is literally torn apart by an angry mob, despite his protests that he's not the sinner they're looking for. Other senators avoid the streets entirely, hiding in their houses while gangs of your supporters roam the city, looking for targets for their rage. The conspirators, who had expected to be hailed as liberators, instead find themselves fugitives in their own city. Brutus and Cassius flee Rome within days of the assassination, understanding that their physical safety depends on putting distance between themselves and the popular fury they've unleashed. Their dream of restoring the Republic through your death has become a nightmare of civil war and popular violence. But even as Rome tears itself apart in the immediate aftermath of your assassination, the longer-term consequences of your career continue to unfold. The administrative systems you established continue to function, staffed by bureaucrats who understand that efficient governance serves their own interests regardless of who holds ultimate authority. The colonies you founded continue to grow and prosper, spreading Roman culture and law throughout territories that had never known either. The military reforms you implemented continue to make Roman armies the most effective fighting force in the ancient world. Most significantly, the precedent you established that exceptional individuals can transcend traditional limitations and reshape entire civilizations, continues to inspire ambitious leaders throughout the Roman world. Octavian, your adopted heir, studies your career with the intensity of a scholar analyzing a sacred text. He understands that you succeeded not just through military genius, but through your ability to communicate a vision of Roman greatness that transcended traditional political categories. But Octavian also learns from your mistakes. He sees that your unwillingness to eliminate potential threats after winning the civil war created the conditions for your assassination. He observes that your open contempt for republican traditions, however ineffective those traditions had become, alienated potential supporters who might have been won over through more subtle approaches. Most importantly, he recognizes that your dramatic personal style, while effective for inspiring loyalty and achieving rapid success, also made you a target for anyone who felt threatened by change. Octavian's approach to achieving supreme power reflects these lessons, where you crossed the Rubicon in a dramatic gesture that forced everyone to choose sides immediately. Octavian accumulates authority gradually through a series of apparently modest steps that don't trigger organized resistance. Where you openly challenged republican institutions, Octavian maintains their forms while quietly emptying them of substance. Where you relied on personal charisma and force of personality, Octavian builds a systematic administrative structure that can function effectively regardless of the qualities of individual leaders. In many ways, Octavian becomes everything you might have been if you had been more patient, more subtle, and more willing to compromise with entrenched interests. He achieves the imperial transformation you envisioned, but he does it in a way that allows former Republicans to convince themselves that they're still living under the old system. It's a masterful political performance that ensures the stability of his regime while preserving your essential vision of what Roman civilization could become. The irony is that Octavian's success validates your fundamental insight about the inadequacy of republican institutions for governing an empire, even as his methods repudiate your approach to achieving necessary changes. You were right that Rome needed to be transformed, but wrong about how that transformation could be accomplished without triggering the kind of violent resistance that ultimately destroyed you. Your military innovations continue to influence Roman tactics for centuries after your death. Yet the speed and flexibility that characterized your campaigns become standard elements of Roman strategic doctrine. Your emphasis on engineering and logistics nice. The unglamorous but essential work of building bridges, organizing supply lines, and maintaining equipment becomes institutionalized in a way that makes Roman armies more effective than any of their competitors. Perhaps more importantly, your approach to integrating conquered peoples into the Roman system becomes the foundation for imperial policy throughout the classical period. Your extension of citizenship to worthy provincials, your respect for local customs within the framework of Roman law, your understanding that successful empires must offer benefits to their subjects rather than simply extracting tribute. These principles guide Roman administration for the next 4 centuries, but your influence extends beyond the purely Roman context. The model of leadership you established, the combination of military genius, political skill, administrative competence, and personal charisma, becomes the template for successful rulers throughout the ancient world and beyond. Kings and emperors from Britain to Persia study your career, trying to understand how you managed to transform yourself from a minor aristocrat into the master of the known world. Your literary legacy proves equally enduring. The commentaries on the Gallic Wars become not just historical documents, but models of clear, precise prose that influence writers for generations. Your ability to describe complex military operations in language that both specialists and general readers can understand establishes a standard for military writing that persists well into the modern era. More subtly, your approach to self-presentation through writing Morth, the way you manage to create an authoritative historical record while subtly emphasizing your own role in events, becomes a model for political leaders trying to shape their own legacies. The third-person narrative voice you employed allows you to appear objective while ensuring that readers understand exactly who was responsible for the achievements being described. Your assassination on the Ides of March becomes one of the most famous political murders in human history, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and philosophy. But what makes the event so compelling isn't just its dramatic circumstances, but what it represents about the relationship between individual greatness and collective institutions. You had become too large for the system that created you. Your achievements, your vision, Your very existence challenged assumptions about power and governance that had guided Roman civilization for centuries. The conspirators who killed you weren't simply jealous rivals or power-hungry politicians. They were men who genuinely believed that your continued existence threatened everything they valued about Roman tradition and Roman identity. The tragedy is that both you and your assassins were probably right. You were indeed transforming Rome in ways that made traditional republican institutions obsolete, and your enemies were correct that allowing you to continue would mean the end of the Republic as they understood it. But they were wrong to believe that the Republic could be preserved through your death. And you were perhaps wrong to believe that such fundamental changes could be implemented without triggering violent resistance. The civil wars that follow your assassinations demonstrate that the choice was never between preserving the Republic and accepting imperial transformation. The choice was between your version of imperial transformation, relatively benevolent, administratively competent, and genuinely committed to expanding the benefits of Roman civilization, and the version that would eventually emerge from the chaos of civil conflict. Octavian's ultimate victory establishes the Roman Empire as a stable, long-lasting institution, but it also represents a narrowing of the possibilities you had opened up. Where you had envisioned an empire that would continue to expand and evolve, incorporating new peoples and new ideas, Octavian creates an empire that prioritizes stability over growth and consolidation over innovation. The world that emerges from the wreckage of the Roman Republic bears your stamp, but it's not quite the world you had imagined. It's more conservative, more hierarchical, and more focused on preserving existing arrangements than on pursuing new possibilities. In many ways, your assassination succeeds in limiting the scope of Roman imperial development, even though it fails to prevent imperial development entirely. Yet your vision of what human civilization could become continues to inspire leaders and thinkers long after the specific political context of your career has become ancient history. The idea that exceptional individuals can transcend the limitations of their circumstances and reshape the world according to their vision remains one of the most powerful concepts in human culture. Your name becomes a title that rulers claim for the next 2 millennia, from the Roman emperors who immediately succeed you to the German Kaisers and Russian Tsars, who seek to legitimize their own authority by claiming descent from your legacy. But more than just a political title, Caesar becomes synonymous with the kind of transformative leadership that can change the course of human history. In the end, perhaps that's your greatest achievement, proving that individual human potential is essentially unlimited when it's guided by intelligence, ambition, and the courage to attempt the impossible. You began life as one aristocratic child, among many in a Roman world that seemed to offer limited possibilities for genuine innovation or transformation. You ended it as the master of the known world, having demonstrated that the boundaries of human achievement are set not by circumstances, but by the willingness to transcend them. Averthe quae vale, Gaius Julius Caesar. Your dice fell where you cast them. The numbers came up in your favor more often than not, and the game you played changed the rules for everyone who came after. History remembers not just what you accomplished, but what you proved was possible for those bold enough to reach for greatness. But your story doesn't end with your death on the marble floor of Pompey's theater. In many ways it's just beginning, because while mortal flesh can be pierced by daggers, ideas proven through action have a way of becoming immortal. Your life becomes a template, a blueprint that ambitious souls will study and attempt to replicate for the next 2,000 years and beyond. The immediate aftermath of your assassination reveals just how completely you had transformed not just Rome's political landscape, but the Roman psyche itself. The conspirators expected to be greeted as liberators, but instead they discover that they've murdered not just a leader but a symbol of everything Romans had come to expect from their civilization. You had made Rome feel invincible, expansive, destined for greatness. Your death makes Romans feel vulnerable, diminished, uncertain about their future for the first time in generations. This psychological impact proves more significant than any of the immediate political consequences. Romans who had grown accustomed to thinking of themselves as citizens of the world's greatest empire suddenly find themselves wondering whether that greatness was tied to your personal leadership rather than to any inherent Roman superiority. The question haunts the collective Roman consciousness: were you simply Rome's greatest leader, or were you the only thing standing between Roman greatness and Roman decline? The answer comes in the form of the civil wars that follow your death. For 13 years, the Roman world tears itself apart as various factions compete to claim your legacy. Mark Antony positions himself as your spiritual heir, the loyal lieutenant who understands your vision and can implement it. Octavian claims legal legitimacy as your adopted son and designated successor. Brutus and the other conspirators insist that they're fighting to restore the republic you supposedly threatened. But none of them truly understands what made you unique. Antony has your charisma and your military skill, but he lacks your political subtlety and your ability to build lasting institutions. Octavian possesses your strategic intelligence and your understanding of Roman psychology, but he lacks your willingness to take dramatic risks and your genuine affection for ordinary Romans. The conspirators have their principles and their devotion to republican traditions, but they have no vision of how those traditions can be adapted to the realities of governing a world empire. The civil wars that rage across the Mediterranean world serve as a kind of experiment in leadership, testing different approaches to the fundamental problems you had grappled with during your career. Each faction represents a different answer to the question of how Rome should be governed, and the ultimate victor will determine not just who rules, but what kind of state Rome becomes. Antony's approach most closely resembles your own in its grand scope and imperial ambition. He understands that Rome's future lies in the East, where the wealth of Egypt and Asia can fund continued expansion and development. His alliance with Cleopatra represents not just a romantic liaison but a strategic partnership aimed at creating a new kind of Mediterranean empire that combines Roman military power with Hellenistic administrative sophistication. But Antony lacks your ability to maintain support among ordinary Romans while pursuing these grand imperial visions. His identification with Eastern luxury and foreign queens strikes many Romans as fundamentally un-Roman, a betrayal of the values that made Rome great in the first place. Where you manage to appear simultaneously as a champion of Roman tradition and as an agent of revolutionary change, Antony seems to have abandoned Roman identity entirely in favor of becoming an Eastern potentate. Octavian's strategy is more subtle and ultimately more successful. He presents himself as the defender of Roman values against foreign influence, the dutiful son avenging his murdered father, the modest citizen who accepts power reluctantly and exercises it responsibly. It's a carefully crafted public persona that allows him to accumulate unprecedented authority while maintaining the fiction that he's simply restoring traditional Roman governance. But Octavian's approach also represents a fundamental narrowing of your vision. Where you saw the Roman Empire as a dynamic, expanding system that could incorporate new peoples and new ideas while maintaining its essential character, Octavian sees it as a stable hierarchical structure that achieves greatness through order rather than through growth. His empire will last longer than your republic ever could have, but it will also be more conservative, more rigid, and less open to the kind of transformative possibilities that your career had revealed. The Battle of Actium. where Octavian's forces defeat Antony and Cleopatra, represents more than just the end of the civil wars. It represents a choice between different versions of what Roman civilization could become. Octavian's victory ensures that Rome will develop along the lines he envisions rather than along the lines you might have preferred, and that choice will shape the next 4 centuries of Mediterranean history. But even as Octavian transforms himself into Augustus and establishes the principate that will govern Rome for the next 3 centuries, your influence continues to permeate every aspect of imperial development. The administrative systems Augustus creates are based on reforms you initiated. The military organization he establishes builds on innovations you pioneered. The ideological framework he uses to justify imperial rule draws heavily on precedents you established. Most importantly, Augustus understands that his legitimacy depends partly on his connection to your legacy. He styles himself as your heir not just legally but spiritually, the man who completed the work you began. The temple he builds to honor your memory becomes one of the most important religious sites in Rome, a physical reminder that the imperial system traces its origins to your vision and your achievements. This connection between your legacy and imperial legitimacy becomes a permanent feature of Roman political culture. Every subsequent emperor, regardless of his actual relationship to your family, claims to embody something of your spirit and your mission. The title Caesar becomes an essential component of imperial dignity, a way of connecting each new ruler to the transformative power you demonstrated during your career. But your influence extends far beyond the specifically Roman context. Throughout the ancient world, kings and generals study your career, trying to understand the sources of your success and the reasons for your ultimate failure. Your commentaries become required reading for anyone seeking to understand the relationship between military victory and political power. Your approach to governance, the combination of personal charisma, administrative competence and strategic vision, becomes the model for effective leadership in countless different contexts. The barbarian chieftains who eventually conquer the Western Roman Empire are often surprisingly well versed in your career and your methods. They understand that successful conquest requires not just military victory, but the ability to create new institutions that can integrate conquered peoples into a functioning political system. Many of them consciously model their own careers on your example, seeing themselves as following the path you blazed from tribal leadership to imperial authority, into as Porsi, into Bela, authority. Medieval kings throughout Europe claimed descent from your legacy, either through actual Roman connections or through symbolic identification with your achievements. Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor represents an explicit attempt to revive your imperial vision in a new context. The Byzantine emperors, who maintain direct institutional continuity with your political innovations, continue to use Caesar as an imperial title until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Even in contexts far removed from European civilization, your career becomes a touchstone for understanding the possibilities and dangers of transformative leadership. Islamic historians study your rise to power as an example of how individual genius can reshape entire civilizations. Chinese scholars compare your career to that of great Chinese emperors, trying to understand the common elements that enable certain leaders to transcend the limitations of their circumstances. But perhaps your most enduring influence comes through the literary and artistic works that your story has inspired. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar captures something essential about the tragic tension between individual greatness and collective institutions. The play suggests that your assassination was both a terrible crime and an inevitable consequence of the contradictions inherent in your position as a republican leader with imperial ambitions. Countless other writers, artists, and thinkers have found in your story a way to explore fundamental questions about power, ambition, loyalty, and the relationship between individual excellence and social responsibility. Your career provides a kind of template for examining these eternal human concerns, a specific historical example that illuminates universal themes. Modern political leaders still invoke your name and your example, though often in ways that reveal more about their own limitations than about any genuine understanding of your achievements. The comparison to Caesar has become a kind of political shorthand for describing leaders who combine personal charisma with transformative vision. While few of those who claim the comparison actually demonstrate the kind of sustained excellence that characterized your career. What makes your story perpetually relevant is not just the scale of your achievements, but the completeness of your transformation from ordinary circumstances to historical immortality. You weren't born to greatness in any obvious sense. Your family was respectable, but not particularly distinguished. Your early circumstances were comfortable, but not luxurious. Your initial opportunities were significant, but not unprecedented. What set you apart was your refusal to accept the limitations that others took for granted. Where most young Romans of your class sought advancement through traditional channels and conventional methods, you consistently chose the more difficult, but potentially more rewarding path of innovation and risk-taking. Where others saw obstacles, you saw opportunities. Where others saw established systems that had to be accommodated, you saw outdated arrangements that could be improved. This willingness to challenge conventional wisdom and to attempt what others considered impossible runs through every phase of your career. Your decision to ally with Pompey and Crassus, despite their mutual hostility, your transformation of a routine governorship in Gaul into a platform for unprecedented conquest, your choice to cross the Rubicon rather than submit to your enemy's demands, your vision of transforming the Roman Republic into a more efficient and inclusive empire. Each of these decisions carried enormous risks, and several came close to destroying you entirely. But you understood something that more cautious leaders often miss. The greatest risk is often the refusal to take any risks at all. By playing it safe, by accepting existing limitations and working within established systems, you might have achieved a comfortable and respectable career, but you would never have accomplished anything truly significant. Your willingness to bet everything on your vision of what was possible distinguishes you from the vast majority of historical figures who achieved power and prominence through more conventional means. Most successful politicians are skilled at working within existing systems. Most successful generals are expert at applying established tactical principles. Most successful leaders are adept at managing existing institutions. You were all of these things, but you were also something more, a revolutionary who understood that truly transformative change requires the courage to abandon the safety of proven methods in favor of untested but potentially superior alternatives. This combination of practical competence and visionary ambition is extraordinarily rare in human history, which explains why your career continues to fascinate students of leadership across cultures and centuries. The manner of your death, assassinated by men who were nominally your colleagues and subordinates, adds another layer of complexity to your legacy. The fact that you were killed not by foreign enemies or popular uprising but by members of your own elite class suggests something important about the challenges facing any leader who attempts fundamental reform of existing systems. Your assassins weren't motivated primarily by personal ambition or material interests. They were driven by a genuine belief that your continued existence threatened institutions and values they considered essential to Roman identity. In their minds, they were patriots saving their country from tyranny, even though the result of their actions was to plunge Rome into a civil war more destructive than anything you had ever contemplated. This dynamic, the conflict between transformative leadership and institutional preservation, remains relevant in every political context, where significant change is necessary but difficult to achieve through normal channels. Your career demonstrates both the potential for individual leadership to overcome systemic obstacles and the dangers that such leadership poses to those who benefit from existing arrangements. The ultimate irony of your assassination is that it failed to prevent the imperial transformation your enemies feared, while succeeding in eliminating the one leader who might have managed that transformation with minimal violence and maximum benefit for all concerned. Octavian's eventual establishment of the Principate achieved everything your critics had warned against. Harms the concentration of unprecedented power in the hands of a single individual, while lacking many of the positive features that had characterized your approach to leadership, where you had maintained genuine connections with ordinary Romans and had used your power to implement reforms that benefited the entire population. Octavian's system was designed primarily to preserve stability and prevent the kind of political competition that had characterized the late Republic. It was more efficient than the old Republican system, but it was also more rigid and less responsive to popular concerns. In many ways, your death ensured that the Roman Empire would develop along more conservative lines than it might have under your continued leadership. The fear of producing another Caesar led subsequent emperors to prioritize control over innovation, stability over growth, and preservation over transformation. The empire that emerged was impressive and long-lasting, but it lacked the dynamic expansiveness that had characterized your vision of what Roman civilization could become. Yet your influence on that empire remained profound, embedded in its institutions, its culture, and its understanding of what effective leadership required. Every competent Roman emperor after Augustus demonstrated some combination of the qualities that had made you successful: military skill, administrative competence, political acumen, and the ability to inspire loyalty among both soldiers and civilians. More broadly, your career established a template for imperial leadership that influenced the development of monarchical systems throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. The idea that legitimate authority could be based on personal excellence rather than just hereditary right, that effective rulers needed to demonstrate competence across multiple domains, that successful empires required leaders who could both conquer territories and integrate them into functioning political systems. These concepts, which you pioneered, became fundamental assumptions about governance throughout much of human history. As we reach the end of your story, we're left with a figure who embodies both the highest possibilities of human achievement and the tragic limitations that constrain even the most exceptional individuals. You proved that it's possible for a single person to reshape civilization itself. But you also demonstrated that such transformation comes at an enormous cost, both personal and social. Your legacy reminds us that greatness is not a comfortable or safe condition. It requires constant vigilance, continuous innovation, and the willingness to accept risks that would paralyze more ordinary individuals. It demands the sacrifice of personal security for public achievement, of individual comfort for collective progress, of present certainty for future possibility. But for those willing to pay that price, your example shows that the rewards can transcend any individual lifetime or personal interest. Through your courage, intelligence, and relentless determination, you transformed yourself from a mortal man into an immortal symbol of human potential. Your name became synonymous with supreme authority, your methods became models for effective leadership, and your vision of what civilization could achieve continued to inspire ambitious souls long after your physical form had returned to dust. In the quiet moments before sleep, as we contemplate the distance between our own circumstances and the heights of achievement your career represents, we might remember that every great transformation begins with a single individual's refusal to accept existing limitations as permanent constraints. You were once just another Roman aristocrat with ambitions and dreams not so different from thousands of others. What made you different was your willingness to act on those dreams, to risk everything in pursuit of excellence, and to never stop reaching for possibilities that others considered impossible. The die is cast, as you said, at the Rubicon, but the game continues, and the example you set continues to challenge each new generation to discover what might be possible if they too have the courage to cross their own rivers and pursue their own visions of greatness. Ava. At K. Vale Caesar. Your story ends, but the story you made possible continues forever.